Sarah Bennett was 34 years old when her life fell apart in the span of 3 weeks. First came the divorce papers, then the medical bills from her father's stroke, and finally the eviction notice from her landlord who had sold the building to developers. As a middle school art teacher in Tucson, Arizona, she earned $38,000 a year before taxes, a salary that had seemed barely adequate when she had a partner splitting expenses. Now, facing the reality of single life with mounting debt, she realized just how broke she actually was. The cheap apartment she could afford wouldn't accept her dog, a 12-year-old golden retriever named Gus, who had been her only constant through the chaos. So when Sarah saw the online auction listing for a derelict motel in a nowhere town called Sentinel Ridge, New Mexico, with a starting bid of $2,000, she made a desperate decision. The Dusty Trails Motor Lodge had been built in 1961 during the golden age of Route 66 travel, back when families drove cross-country in station wagons and stopping at a roadside motel was an adventure. The listing showed a horseshoe-shaped building with 14 rooms facing a cracked swimming pool full of tumbleweeds. The vintage neon sign still stood out front, its pink script promising color TV and air cooling to an interstate that had been rerouted 15 miles south in 1984. For 40 years the motel had stood abandoned, too remote to attract developers and too deteriorated to salvage. The current owner, listed as the estate of Vernon Kowalski, wanted it gone. Sarah bid $4,000, her entire remaining savings, and won without competition. She drove to Sentinel Ridge on a Saturday in late August when the temperature hit 109 degrees. The town consisted of a gas station that still had analog pumps, a diner that opened whenever the owner felt like it, and maybe 30 houses scattered across the desert landscape. The motel sat 2 miles outside town, completely alone except for the wind and the circling hawks. When Sarah pulled into the parking lot, Gus whining nervously in the back seat, she felt her stomach drop. The photographs hadn't conveyed the true scale of decay. The roof had collapsed on rooms 4 and 5. Every window was either broken or missing entirely. Sand had drifted through open doors, creating small dunes inside the rooms. The pool contained what appeared to be a rusted-out pickup truck from the 70s. The motel office was surprisingly intact compared to the rest of the property. The door was locked, and Sarah had to break a window to get inside. The interior looked like someone had walked out in the middle of a shift and never returned. A 1983 calendar hung on the wall, open to November. The registration desk still held a push-button phone and a metal cash box, empty except for a few pennies. Behind the desk, a pegboard displayed 13 room keys on numbered hooks. Room 13's key was missing. Sarah spent her first night in the office, sleeping on the cracked vinyl couch with Gus pressed against her legs. She woke before dawn to the sound of coyotes and lay in the darkness wondering what she had done. She had no contractor skills, no construction budget, and no plan beyond the vague notion that she could maybe fix up a few rooms and rent them to travelers who got lost looking for the old Route 66. It was insane. She was insane. At first light, she began exploring the property, starting with room 1 and working her way around the horseshoe. Most rooms were identical disasters, mattresses reduced to springs and mold, televisions from the 60s, their tubes long since imploded, bathrooms with fixtures torn out by scavengers looking for copper piping. Room 6 still had a suitcase sitting on the luggage rack, its contents petrified by time and desert air. Room 9's walls were covered in graffiti from the 90s. Room 11 had become home to a family of owls who had built their nest on top of the broken air conditioning unit. Sarah documented everything with her phone, alternating between taking inventory and crying at the sheer impossibility of her situation. Room 13 was different. The door was locked, and unlike the other rooms, the lock hadn't been forced or broken. Sarah tried the master key from the office, but it didn't work. She tried picking the lock with a bobby pin like she'd seen in movies, which accomplished nothing except bending the pin. Finally, frustrated and overheated, she kicked the door. The old wood splintered near the lock, and she was able to reach through and open it from the inside. The room was dark despite the afternoon sun. Someone had covered the window with what looked like aluminum foil, blocking almost all external light. Sarah fumbled for the light switch, not expecting it to work, but to her shock, the overhead bulb flickered to life. The room had electricity. Her confusion deepened as she looked around. Unlike every other room in the motel, this one appeared to have been occupied recently. A sleeping bag lay rolled up on the bare mattress. A camping stove sat on the desk. Empty water jugs lined one wall. And covering every available surface, tacked to the walls, spread across the floor, and stacked on the dresser, were paintings. Sarah stepped into the room, her art teacher's eye immediately recognizing quality. These weren't amateur works or motel decoration. These were real paintings, oils on canvas, executed with skill and confidence. The subjects varied wildly. Landscapes of desert sunsets, abstract compositions in bold primary colors, portraits of people Sarah didn't recognize, still lifes of everyday objects rendered with meticulous detail. She counted 47 paintings in total, ranging in size from small 8x10 canvases to a massive piece that took up most of one wall. What struck Sarah most was the signature. Every single painting bore the same mark in the lower right corner, a stylized K with a vertical line through it. She had seen that signature before but couldn't immediately place where. She pulled out her phone to photograph the paintings, but there was no cell service this far from town. Instead, she carefully examined each work, noting the techniques and styles. Whoever had painted these had formal training. The brushwork showed confidence. The compositions demonstrated understanding of classical principles. The color theory was sophisticated. Then she found the notebook. It was wedged between the mattress and the box spring, a spiral-bound sketchbook with a water-stained cover. Sarah flipped it open to find page after page of pencil sketches, studies for the paintings that surrounded her. Interspersed with the drawings were handwritten notes. Started the red series today, finally got the cadmium mixture right. Ran out of titanium white. We'll have to go to Albuquerque next week. Feeling stronger. The desert light is everything I hoped. The final entry, dated April 2019, read simply, "If anyone finds this, the paintings are my gift. Do with them what you will." I got to spend my last months doing what I loved, in a place where nobody asked questions or judged me. That's worth more than anything. VK, Vernon Kowalski, the name from the estate listing. Sarah's hands trembled as she flipped back through the notebook, piecing together a story. Vernon had been sick, that much was clear from various references to treatments and declining energy. He had come to this abandoned motel to paint in solitude, living in secret in room 13, while creating what appeared to be his final body of work. But who was he? And why did his signature seem so familiar? Sarah drove into town and used the Wi-Fi at the diner to search for information. She typed VK artist into Google and scrolled through dozens of results before finding it. Victor Kowalski, listed in an article about emerging artists from the 1970s Soho scene. The article included a small photo of a young man with intense eyes and paint-stained hands, standing in front of a canvas bearing that distinctive K signature. According to the article, Kowalski had been considered a rising star in the New York art world, showing at important galleries and earning critical praise for his bold, abstract expressionist works. Then, in 1981, he had simply disappeared from the art scene. The article speculated he had moved to New Mexico for health reasons, but noted that no one had heard from him in years. Sarah spent the next 3 days researching. Victor Kowalski had been diagnosed with HIV in 1980, during the early years of the AIDS crisis when treatment options were limited and stigma was overwhelming. Rather than face the judgment of the New York art world, he had moved to New Mexico, settling in various small towns and supporting himself with odd jobs. He had largely stopped painting, demoralized by his illness and isolation. Tax records showed he had purchased the Dusty Trails Motor Lodge in 1995 for $12,000, apparently planning to renovate and operate it. But the work proved too much, and the motel remained closed. He had lived in a small house in Sentinel Ridge, working occasionally as a handyman, unknown and unrecognized. Medical advances in the late 90s and early 2000s had allowed him to manage his condition, and according to his notebook, he had experienced a creative resurgence in his final years. Vernon Kowalski had died in June 2019 at age 71 from complications related to pneumonia. With no close family, his estate had gone through probate and eventually been tasked with liquidating his assets, which included the worthless motel property. The estate attorney had no idea Vernon had been living secretly in room 13, creating what would become his final masterworks. Sarah contacted an art appraiser in Santa Fe, a woman named Dr. Patricia Moss, who specialized in 20th century American art. When Sarah described the paintings and their provenance, Dr. Moss made the 3-hour drive that same day. She spent 6 hours in room 13, examining each canvas with a jeweler's loupe, taking photographs, consulting reference books. When she finally emerged, her face was flushed with excitement. "Do you understand what you have here?" Dr. Moss asked. Victor Kowalski was a major figure in the late 70s art scene. His early works sell for $50,000 to $70,000 when they come up at auction, which is rare because most are in museum collections. But these, she gestured at the motel room, these are his mature works. This is what he was building toward. The emotional depth? The technical mastery? The confidence? Art historians thought his career ended in 1981. You found his lost final period. The appraisal took 2 weeks. Dr. Moss brought in colleagues from galleries and museums. They authenticated signatures, analyzed paint composition, researched exhibition history. The final valuation report listed the collection's total worth at $1.5 million, with the large wall piece alone valued at $300,000. Major museums and private collectors immediately expressed interest in acquiring the works. Sarah sat in room 13, surrounded by Vernon's paintings, thinking about the strange parallel between their stories. Both of them had come to this abandoned motel as refuge from lives that had fallen apart. Vernon had been fleeing stigma and illness. Sarah had been fleeing divorce and poverty. He had found in this lonely place the freedom to create without judgment. She had found, unexpectedly, a fortune. But as she read through Vernon's notebook again, studying his careful observations about light and color and the desert landscape he had grown to love, she realized the money was only part of what she had discovered. Vernon Kowalski had been erased from art history, forgotten by a world that had no time for sick artists from an inconvenient epidemic. His final works, created in secret in an abandoned motel room, represented not just aesthetic achievement, but a profound act of resilience. Sarah made her decision over the following weeks. She contacted the estate attorney and discovered that under New Mexico law, as the property owner, she had clear title to anything left on the premises. The paintings were legally hers. She could sell them, pay off her debts, secure her future. Instead, she worked with Dr. Moss to organize a retrospective exhibition at the New Mexico Museum of Art in Santa Fe, titled Victor Kowalski: The Desert Years. The exhibition would travel to major museums across the country, reintroducing Kowalski's work to the art world and telling the story of his hidden final period. Sarah negotiated with the museums to sell 15 of the 47 paintings, keeping the rest for a permanent collection. The sales brought in $600,000. She used part of the money to establish the Victor Kowalski Foundation, providing grants to artists living with chronic illness. Another portion funded the renovation of the Dusty Trails Motor Lodge, not as a working motel but as an artist residency program. Room 13 was preserved exactly as Vernon had left it, viewable through a climate-controlled glass wall, a monument to his secret creative refuge. Sarah kept the large wall piece, the $300,000 painting, and hung it in what would become her living quarters in the renovated motel office. She left her teaching position and became director of the residency program, welcoming artists who needed time and space away from the demands of the world. Gus spent his final years sleeping in the desert sun, content and safe. On the anniversary of her discovery, Sarah stood in room 13 with the notebook open to Vernon's final entry. "Do with them what you will," he had written. She thought about what those paintings meant beyond their market value. They were evidence of a life that refused to be diminished by circumstance. They were beauty created in isolation. They were a gift from someone who had nothing left to give except his art. Sarah had come to Sentinel Ridge with $4,000 and a desperate hope for shelter. She had found something far more valuable: proof that even in our darkest, most forgotten places, creativity endures. Vernon Kowalski had painted in secret, expecting nothing, hoping for nothing, creating simply because he had to. And 40 years after the art world forgot him, his work would hang in museums, studied and celebrated, a testament to the power of persistence. The paintings were worth $1.5 million. But the real discovery Sarah understood was the reminder that value and worth are not the same thing. Vernon had known that. He had lived it. And now, through his hidden gift, Sarah knew it too.